So let's say that you found a book that you're interested in purchasing on eBay. What should you do in order to determine your bidding strategy or your maximum bid and so on? So let's say, for example, I found a book that I wanted. In this case, let's say we're looking at Amazing Spider-Man number 13. And we found an auction for a 5.0, and let's say we take a look at this and I'm happy with the 5.0. I'm happy with this particular 5.0. Don't just look at the grade itself. Look at the book. This is just an example for me personally. If we look at the back cover, it has this. Come on, give me the zoom. Give me the zoom. There you go. It has this stamp on it. I mean, that's taken into account to make it a 5.0, so I understand. Things like this are deal breakers for me, but maybe not for you. What's nice about having these sorts of things is if you look at the front looks really good. It's that stamp that makes it down to a 5.0, or partially makes it down to a 5.0, so it makes it a well-presenting from the front 5.0. But I digress. So let's say we have this book, and we're wanting to put a bid in. How should I plan that? How should I plan that strategy? I've come down to a particular auction, this book. How should I bid on it? So step one, you should determine what you think the value of that book is as it stands. And I've mentioned this before, when you're doing value, you should look at a number of different sources. So looking at price guides, and on eBay itself, looking at sold auctions. Of course, always look at sold auctions. So let's go through that right now. So let's look at a couple sources. This is Comics Price Guide. We're looking at a 5.0. It's saying that the graded version of that is worth about $9.75. This is actually kind of surprising. I find this high for this book, and I also find that Comics Price Guide is usually low on graded books, and that's why we look at a number of sources. So it says $9.75. Let's look at Go Collect. So if you're not familiar with Go Collect, this grabs prices of sold slabbed books and sort of aggregates them and comes up with an estimate of what it's worth. So this says Amazing Spider-Man 13 at a 5.0 is worth about $900. So there we have two data points. And then I'll also look at sold auctions on eBay. So we're here in 785, 770. So around the high 70s appears to be about right currently. Here's a 910. That one got away a little bit, closer to what's probably what Go Collect says. This says 610, but this is PGX. I wouldn't compare PGX because people pay less for PGX because it's less reputable of a grading service. But CGC and CBCS, I put at the same sort of level of reputation. So I'll compare CBCS and CGC as the same. But PGX, personally, I don't even buy. I have one PGX book, and I kind of regret having that in the first place. And we don't want to look at. We only want to look at sold auctions. We don't want to look at current auctions, and we'll come back to this page. So this is just searching for Amazing Spidey at a 5.0 slabbed. This is the auction we're currently looking at. Here's a buy it now for $9.63. Seems a little bit higher than what it's worth, but that is a buy it now. But then we see don't look at this and say, oh man, a CGC 5.0 is worth $1,600. It's not. No one's paid that. Just because someone is asking for $1,600 doesn't mean that's what it's worth, or even $1,200 doesn't mean that's what it's worth, or 11.1. Just because someone's asking a price doesn't mean that's what it's worth. That's why you want to look at sold auctions. This is reflective of what people are actually paying. So these seem like decent prices. They'll seem kind of low. Kind of throw that 910 in there, and then we talk about a 900 and a 975. Let's say it's worth 900. Let's say that we've we've come to the conclusion that we think that Amazing Spider-Man 13 graded at a 5.0 of a CGC is worth $900. We've done a bit of homework. We looked at some price guides. We looked at sold auctions, and we're comfortable with saying this book is worth $900. So next, we need to have a consistent buying strategy based upon that value and then stick to it. Ideally, we would have had this buying strategy determined beforehand, and this is just what we always kind of do. What that strategy is could be different. It's different for different people, but it's a good idea to have one and stick with it and be consistent with it. For example, mine is pretty conservative. In general, I don't like paying more than 80% of what I value a book to be. But that's me in my position. I've probably become pretty spoiled just because I know a lot of sellers and I get good deals from sellers, from local comic shops, from some traveling sellers that I see at shows and stuff. And I've gotten a pretty good reputation with them, so they cut me pretty good deals. So as a general rule, I don't like to pay more than 80% of what I value a book to be. For some people, it might be, yeah, they pay 100%. That's fine. But stick to that. Don't be like, well, I'll pay 120% of what it's worth for an active auction. There's a place for that, and I'll get to that. But if you are bidding on an auction that is taking in bids, not considering a buy it now sort of situation, then have some sort of percentage strategy that is probably capped at 100% of what you think the book is currently worth. If you want to go above that, that's what buy it nows are for. Buy it nows usually see for costing more money, but you're getting a value for that. You're getting not having to worry about the actual bidding wars and the auction itself. That's what you're paying for with a buy it now. You're paying a premium. You're paying more for it, but you're not having to deal with the stress of an auction. That's what you're getting. So in this case, if we were doing my math, if I valued it at 900 and I want to pay no more than 80%, that's probably putting us at, let's see, I should probably be able to do this math easier than I'm able to. Was it like 710, something like that? 900 times 0.8, 720. So my max bid for this book would be 720. And I'd put that in and I'd call that good. This is also giving eBay a little bit of leeway because there's going to be tax and shipping on that. So I'd end up paying, if I wanted at 720, I'd end up paying more than that 80%. So keep that in mind, that eBay does tax and there is shipping and so on. When it comes to shipping, I think what's also a good idea is if there's a seller that has a book that I like, I usually also won't buy for them unless they have one other thing that I'm interested in, just to save on shipping. Another thing to think about, because you can't really avoid shipping in some cases. You know, there's some control over what this ends up being, the amount that I bid, but I can't change the shipping I'm charged on an auction. So if I can get some value out of that, and if this person has some other items that I'm interested in and willing to bid on, I'm more likely to actually bid on this because I have at least the hope that I can get some value out of that shipping that I'm paying. So I would bid 720 on this if I was actually wanting to buy this book. Again, I would bid 720 on this if it wasn't for that back cover. But again, this is just a for example of this strategy. All right, so those are the two first things. I have a value. I have a consistent strategy, and based upon that strategy, I have a max bid. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about really isn't another step. It's why should you stick to that strategy? We've all been in the heat of the moment when it comes to auctions. The clock is ticking down. You put in your max bid. There's a minute left, and someone outbids you by a little amount. You put in $720, and you're the highest bidder for a while. There's 5 minutes left, and it goes up, and it's now $525. Why should you stop? Why should you not get caught up in that bidding war? And it's happened to all of us. I've fallen for it. But there's a reason. There's reasons why you shouldn't do that. Because you have to realize that when it comes to bidding, you're playing a game. And when I say a game, I'm talking about coming to game theory, and how people interact with each other. Auctions are a game. It's a complex game, but I'm going to try to simplify it and have this be just a 2-player game. Now, in the reality, it's a multiplayer game. There are multiple people potentially bidding on this. But to make it simpler, we're going to say that this game exists between the 2 highest bidders at any one time, or at the current time when you're thinking about putting in another high bid. Looking at our simplified game, where we're only considering the 2 highest bidders. So we have 2 players. We'll say bidder 1, we'll say that's us, and bidder 2 is who is the other highest bidder. We have determined the maximum that we'd like to pay for this book. Bidder 2 also has a maximum they'd like to pay for this book. So we'll call that max 1 and max 2. There's also what I'll call an over for each. Now, the over is if they get caught in a bidding war, the maximum they'll end up actually going, or if they have this idea of the maximum they'd like to pay, but this is the maximum they will pay because they just want to get it over with, or they're saying, I'll pay as much as anyone else will pay for this. What the maximum they'll actually put in. But there's also the maximum of the value that they're actually happy with, which is the max 1 and the max 2. Again, to make this easy, let's say both player 1 and player 2, or bidder 1 and bidder 2, are similar to each other. And they're both on let's say the upper end, just to make it fair. And let's say that max 1 and max 2 are both about 900. So they both determined that the book is worth about 900, and they're willing to pay 100%. Maybe one's a little bit less in one area, a little bit higher in the other area, but they both come to about their max 1 and max 2 is they're both around 900. And their over is, let's say it's also similar. So over 1, over 2 is about 130% of their max, which is 1170. So that is, if they get in the bidding war, I mean, there's still a cap, right? They're not going to put in $1 million. There's some sort of cap they're going to put in if they get in a bidding war. And we'll treat those two cases as the same, the bidding war and the I'm just putting in a large overvalue as the same, because in the end it is the same. This is the max that they're actually going to type into that box. Doesn't matter if they do it a day before or a minute or seconds before the auction ends. All right, so we also need to define, what does it mean to win and lose the game? We know what it means to win and lose an auction, but what does it mean to win and lose the game? I'd actually argue there's a third state. There's not just winning or losing. There's sort of a neutral state. So we'll say there's a win state, there's a lose state, and there's also a neutral state. I'm just going to call it push, so I don't have to spell out neutral. And each of these we can assign some sort of value to. It doesn't really matter as long as it's balanced, so we might as well make it easy and say that when we win, that has a value of 1. When we push, that has a value of 0. And what is this push or neutral state? Well, if we don't win the auction, right? If we don't win the auction, we haven't paid any money. We haven't gotten anything back. We didn't get the book. So we're in the same state that we were before we played the game, is with the same amount of money and the same amount of book. So it's a push. We're neutral. So losing the game, we don't want to do. That's a -1. And what does it mean to lose the game? Well, to lose the game means that we bought the book for more than what we want to buy the book for. Then we've lost the game. So there's 4 possibilities here, looking back at the game grid. We could bid our max, and the other bidder could bid their max. If both of our maxes are about the same, there's about a 50% chance that we win, and a 50% chance that they win. It could be, maybe we both bid exactly 900, and it's whoever gets the bid in first. Maybe ours is 900 and their bid is 901, so they win, or it could be the reverse. If we're saying they're both about 900, we'll say there's a 50% chance to end up in the win state. So 50% times 1 is 1/2. The case that we bid our max and the other bidder bids their over. Well, if we bid 900 and they bid 1170, they're going to win the auction. They'll also win the game, because what they'll end up actually paying is just 1 increment above the 900. Right? That's the way auctions work. If you put in a bid above the current high bid, if they put in 1170 over the 900, they don't pay the 1170. They pay the next increment, 905, 910, or whatever it is. So they would win the book at close to the max. But just because they win doesn't mean we lose. We actually end up in a push, because we didn't get the book, but we also didn't pay anything. Now, if we look at the inverse, in that bidder 2 bids their max and we bid their over, then it's the opposite case. We win. We get the 1. What about this case? We both bid over. So we bid 1170, they bid 1171. They win the auction, paying 1171, but they lost the game because they paid over what they want to pay. And the opposite, they bid 170 or 1170. We bid 1171. We won the auction, but we lost the game because we bid more than what we wanted to pay. We got the book, but we lost the game. Losing the game is paying more than what you want to pay. So about half the time we win the auction, but when we win the auction, we actually lose. So the value here is -1/2. So we don't have any control over this. We have control over us. So we can either bid our max or bid over. And things being equal, if we sum up the columns, 1/2 plus 0, our value for bidding the max is 1/2. Our value for bidding the over, 1 plus -1/2, is also 1/2. So in a single instance of the game, it appears that it doesn't matter whether I bid my max or I bid my over. The resulting value is the same, right? Well, it turns out it's not that easy. So it gets more complex than that. We looked at this single instance of this game representing this single auction. But does that mean that the overall game is over? Well, if you won, then yes. But if you lost, you are still in the super game. So a super game is when you realize that the game repeats itself, and the previous iteration of the game affects the next iteration of the game. So if you were not the winner of that game for this particular auction, you are still in the super game because you still don't have the Amazing Spider-Man 13 in a 5.0 or whatever. So there's going to be another auction, which itself is another game. You aren't out of the super game until either one, you get your Amazing Spider-Man 13 at a 5.0, or you decide that you don't want it anymore. If you don't win the auction and you still want that book, odds are you are going to be bidding on another Amazing Spider-Man 13 at a 5.0 sometime in the future. So you're playing another game. What the super game is realizing that they all exist. Those individual games exist in the same super game. So we have to think about that. So let's talk a little bit about the super game and how these individual games affect each other. In our individual game, we came up with these values of whether we bid our max or our over. But considering that we may have to play this game again in the super game, how often do we have to play the super game? And what sort of state do we set ourselves in if we have to play the game again in the super game? If we look at each of the possibilities, here we win the auction half the time. Here we win the auction half the time. And here we win the auction none of the time. So half of the time in this game, we have to play the game again. We win the auction half the time. We lose the auction half the time. So half the time we don't have the book, so we have to play it again. Now, this isn't a simplified version of the game where we're only considering 2 bidders. In reality, there might be 10 bidders, which we are one of. If that's the case, we have to play the game again 9/10 of the time, or 90% of the time, which is the majority of the time. So when we play a single instance of the game, we have to most likely assume we're going to have to play the game again. And maybe even again and again. Long enough timeline, eventually we will win the auction, but we're probably going to have to play the game multiple times. So now we have to start considering, well, which of these states puts us in a good position for the next game? Now, the first time that we play this, we say that we win the overall super game if we pay close to this. Each individual game, this has to be recalculated because things may have changed. So let's say we lose our first instance of that game. Let me clear some of this stuff out here. If we have to play this game again, we have to start from the beginning. The game looks the same. Same grid. We're bidder 1. We're going against bidder 2. There's a max 1. An over 1. Bidder 2 has their max and their over. But this is it's the same game, but it's a new instance of the game. This value of max 1 has to be recalculated. And that value, doing it the same way we did for game 1, is now considering the sold auction of the previous game. And we can't ignore that, or else we're not on even ground against bidder 2, because they are likely considering the previous game, what the auction ended at. What was the value of the book as decided by that single auction? So the value has gone up. That is our max and their max has gone up. It's no longer 900 because we're considering, and all the stuff that we're considering the previous sold auction, which in this case sold for about $1170, jumping from $700 to $1170. And this immediate sale on eBay holds a lot of weight. So in the short term, we may have affected the price because we and some other person bid the over. We've caused a short-term, hopefully short-term, spike. But it's at least short-term enough, or long-term in the short term, to affect our next instance of the game. So now, in order to be competitive, our max 1 has to be much higher than our 900. And maybe we win the auction, but if our max 1 is now 1170, and let's say we win right here at 1170, we've won the immediate game. We've won the auction, we've won the immediate game, but we've lost the super game because we've paid way more than what we originally wanted to pay. So what it comes down to really is keeping in mind that when you bid high and you cause the price to jump on a single auction, you are affecting what you personally are going to have to pay to win that auction in the future. So be mindful of your future self. This idea of keeping your future self in mind is something that I've mentioned before, but it's important because a single auction does not exist in a bubble. It exists in a super game. And as long as you are in that super game, you want to mitigate the price you have to pay in the super game so you win the overall super game. That's why, even though in an individual game, it looks like it doesn't matter whether you bid your max or bid your over. In an individual game, the value is the same. But in the super game, by bidding your over, assuming you're going to lose, and you're most likely going to lose, you are changing the next game in the super game, and therefore hurting your own chances to win the overall super game. So that is why you want to have that strategy, capping it at 100% of what you think the value is, and stick to that. Don't ever bid the over. If the other person bids the over, let them bid the over. You'll win. You'll lose the auction, but you won't lose the game. You'll push. And as long as there's not someone else out there who's bidding the over, which you can't guarantee, of course, but at least you're not part of the problem. You've set yourself up for the next game to still be able to win. But if we keep along this path, if this over happens, and then then you're going against some other bidder, and the over happens again, and it leads to the next game you have to play, and the over happens again. Each time you're affecting the value or the perceived value, at least in the short term, as these auctions go, of what the value of that book is. And you're going to have to keep increasing your bid until you are way over what you originally wanted to pay. Let the dum-dums be the dum-dums. People are going to bid overs, but there's usually not a lot of people that do that. So your best bet is to bid your max. Don't bid your over. Assume other people are going to do what you're going to do. So if other people are going to do what you are going to do, what is the best case? The best case is to bid your max and probably lose, because lose the auction. In each of these cases, you're most likely going to lose the auction, except for this, but it's not really worth the risk of the other. You're most likely going to lose the auction. So set yourself up to have a better chance at the super game in the next iteration of the individual game. So don't forget the super game. Do yourself a favor. You can't necessarily assume that you're going to win the auction you're bidding on. So make sure you're setting yourself up for a better position the next time you play the game. With a number of people bidding on a single auction, odds are you aren't going to win any individual game. So you're gonna most likely play another. Put yourself in the best position to only pay what you think is reasonable in the next game. So those are the main strategies. Again, the main takeaways from here are to determine a value. Make sure you do research. Go to multiple sources. The easy ones to get to and that are free sources are things like Comics Price Guide, Go Collect, and of course looking at sold auctions. Only look at sold auctions. Come up with a consistent buying strategy and make sure you stick to it. And then we talked about why you want to stick to that by recognizing both the game theory of a single auction and then the super game that exists between multiple auctions. Don't ruin the next iteration of the game for yourself or honestly for other people. I mentioned we'd come back to this talking about buy it now. If you want to do the thing of I'll just pay a ridiculous amount or way over its worth just in order for it to be done with and I don't have to worry about it. I get that. I've done that. I've been on a hunt for a book for a long time and gone through multiple auctions and kept losing again and again and again to the point I was like, you know what? I don't care. I will break my 80% rule. I will pay 100% or maybe even a little bit more because I want this book so bad and I'm tired of being stressed out of going through these auctions. I know it's going to go up in value. In the long run, it will be a good investment. I'm willing to pay more for it. That's what buy it now is for, right? So if I didn't want to worry about this auction and my 720, is it going to win? Is it going to not? I just want it to be done and over with. This 963 buy it now seems like a pretty good option. If I put this 963 or a 950 or something into this bid, I may have set myself up for a bad time when I lose this game and have to play the next bidding game, because I've had a hand in raising the price of that book, because the calculation of values takes into account this auction the next time that I do a new auction. So that's what we have buy it nows for, and stick to reasonable buy it nows. This is a reasonable buy it now. If I don't want to worry about bidding, this is a very, if the book is valued at 900, and I'm sure this is going to go up in the future, 963 as far as a long-term investment goes, that's what that's for. Don't overbid or overpay or put in high bids on active auctions, because then you are just setting yourself up for having to pay more if you inevitably have to play the game again. So that's it. That's the main strategies. Other things to look out for, as I mentioned, particularly if an auction has a high shipping price, check out what the other items that person has. Maybe you can get a bit of a 2-for-1 and get something else, and they combine the shipping on those things. Think about those things. If there's a bunch of auctions going on for the same book, I'll do that a lot. If I'm looking for a particular book and I see there's a bunch of auctions for this, and I see one book is going for a little bit higher than another one, if that higher book, if they have a bunch of other books that I want, it might be worth paying a little bit more to save a bunch on shipping for other books. So don't take the idea of combined shipping for granted. It might be worth paying a little bit more on the book, because in the end, it's all just what you're paying for it. The cost and the tax and the shipping, it all comes from the same place. Whether more is being considered for the price of the book and less for shipping, or more for shipping and less for the book, it's all coming from the same pool. So keep sort of those sort of things in mind. So that's it. Let me know what your eBay strategies are. If there's anything you have to add to this, I'd be interested to know. But this is just what the things that I think of when I'm bidding on something on eBay, and particularly when it comes to that game theory stuff that some people might not think of. And hopefully it will convince you to not get caught up in the moment, in the heat of the moment, and raise the price of the book in a short-term sense. Because it probably doesn't really raise the value of the book long-term, but in short-term, for the next time you play the game, it's probably going to have a big effect, and you're really only hurting yourself by doing so. So keep those things in mind, and then like, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube stuff, and we'll see you soon. Thanks all. Bye. This video was brought to you by Titan Comic Pressing. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Titan Comic Pressing LLC.